Hello, welcome to Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California. I'm Pastor Shafer, the senior pastor at Mount Olive. And each week on Hope Matters, we interview an interesting person from around our community or around the country or even around the world on the theme of hope, because we believe that hope matters. My guest today is Tori Valcarcel, who has just finished her first year as a student at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California. Welcome, Tori. Glad you're with us.
Thank you for having me.
So you may have you're at Berkeley, but home is in Maryland. So that's a big jump across the country. So what made you fly across the country for seminary?
Well, I mean, of all of the years to start seminary, I guess this was the year to do it because I didn't actually have to fly out yet. COVID sort of put the kibosh on the plans of being physically in Berkeley. But I knew once I committed to seminary, I knew I wanted to go to an ELCA seminary, which sort of, limits your options in the best sense. And I had been to Chicago a couple of times. I've been to the Philly campus and the Gettysburg campus of United. Gettysburg is in my backyard, not literally, but as the crow flies. And I love Gettysburg, but it was too close. And there was something about Berkeley and PLTS that was calling to me. And I was joking, I joke with people when they ask why I picked Berkeley. And I was like, well, the weather was the only thing that fit the criteria. Little bit of a joke, but also somewhat true. I just knew I couldn't make it in a Chicago winter. I was like, no, not gonna happen.
I do understand, having lived in Chicago for 16 years. So they're an acquired taste.
Bless your heart.
It was fine. And you also, besides coming out of Lutheran campus ministry at the University of Maryland, you also spent a year as what we call in the church a YAGM, and that's of course in language for a young adult in global mission work, which is one of the wonderful programs of our church. So you were telling me before we started recording that you served your YAGM year in South Africa. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm so sorry. My neighbor decided to mow right
That's
now.
All right. That's all right. Your sound is still all right.
All right. Yeah, so I decided, pulled by the Spirit, pushed by my campus minister, all of the above, to apply for YAGM. And I knew going into it that I had certain countries that I would like to go to, but the way the process works, it's a little bit like speed dating. You say what you would like, and then they come back and say, what about these? And then you say, sure. So yeah, when I was offered the placement of South Africa, I did a lot of thinking and discerning and praying, and it was one of those things where I don't know, people often ask, like, oh, would you go back and do something again? Like, would you choose to go to Maryland again? Would you choose to do YAGM again? And it's like, I don't know. I mean, knowing what I know now, it's kind of hard to say, like, I would be a different person had I not done it. And so, yeah, it was an interesting year. It was the year I was the only person to get a visa to work in South Africa. And so unfortunately that meant that I was alone in the country. I had 3 cohort members that were in the Kingdom of Eswatini. And then the other 3 cohort members were sent to Tanzania, which, if you're familiar with the continent of Africa, Tanzania is several countries away from South Africa. So it was a hard year to be so physically isolated. But I had a really wonderful cohort, and we worked really hard to stay in touch throughout the year and to support each other, and also to encourage each other to really reach in and dig into and put roots down in our communities as we could. So yeah, there's not a single word to sum up what a YAGM year is like.
Were you doing teaching, or what was your task as a YAGM there?
Yeah, I had a really interesting placement in my opinion. I was living in Atteridgeville, which is a township just outside of Pretoria. And Pretoria being a city about an hour away from Johannesburg. And so in this township, I was living about a block away and working for a Lutheran church. It's called ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Southern Africa, pretty similar to ELCA. Um, and so I was working at this church, which was the J.S. Manele, J. Masipa was the congregation, and then the J.S. Manele Diaconate Center was where I was working. So they had a creche, which is like a preschool with 80 to 100 kids. They had a sort of old folks weekly group, like it's the Marcosa Senior Citizens Group. So they would get together every day of the week and do Bible study and crafts and the choir, things like that. And then they also had a home health care. So there were a couple of retired nurses in the community, and they would sort of centralize here at the Diaconate Center and then go out into the community and do visits for elderly homebound people that were sick, and just sort of like, yeah, it was a community health program, which was fantastic because my undergraduate degree is community health.
Wonderful. That's great. And now you finished a year of seminary and you have 3 more to go, including internship. As you look to the future, what would you like to be doing in the ELCA after you graduate from seminary?
In the ELCA, so you caught me because normally my answer for what do you want to do when you grow up is be an astronaut or something. But in the ELCA, we don't yet have an astronautical program, unfortunately. That's such a good question. I'm in the process of going for ordination. I'm in candidacy for Word and Sacrament. And I don't know that I envision myself doing parish ministry. And I mean that in the most positive way possible, I guess. But I don't know if I imagine myself 10 years from now pastoring a congregation, or even being involved in campus ministry. And I say that, and I don't mean to rule that out or to say like, oh, I want to be a pastor, but not that type of pastor, because that's, doesn't the Holy Spirit love to just ruin those plans immediately? But the more I work and study and play and learn with everyone at PLTS, the more encouraged I am to imagine a church that is beyond what I grew up in, that is beyond what we're used to thinking about as church, that is beyond the 4 walls of the building, beyond people who are already baptized, already part of the church, things that are, it's this sense that I have this sort of hope for the church body to grow beyond what it is, and to undergo transformations, because I think that the church has to change. And I think in the places where it hasn't changed, or where it's refused to change, is where there's been a lot of conflict. And certainly the more I learn about the reformers and Luther, good old Luther, the more that is sort of not cemented, but sort of like affirmed in my heart, is this sense of like, there are really precious things, like things that we can hold to and honor tradition. And there's also things that we have to let go of and put to rest and thank for where it has taken us thus far, and then say, moving forward, we can imagine whole new worlds. That was a very long answer.
That's all right. That's all right. And and there are, if my career says in the church, it says anything, there are lots of possibilities beyond traditional parish ministry, because I've done them,
That's true. That's true. I should remember who I'm speaking to.
No, don't, not to worry on that. But so that the theme of these interviews is the theme of hope, Tori. So Where do you find hope in the world these days, for yourself, for the country, for however you want to define it?
Mm. I'll start small or close to home, if you will. So I adopted a dog in November. His name is Moose. He's inside right now, but I'm sure patiently waiting at the window. And if you've ever had a pet or adopted, or even just like had a really nice little plant or a fish, or some people aren't dog people, but being able to see and love another creature, and to have another creature, another piece of God's creation love you in return, gives me hope. And that's kind of, not to oversimplify, but the way that I feel when my goddaughter looks at me, or when my dog looks up at me, when my little brother comes and gives me a hug, like those small things, those small little moments of love and grace and like reminders of joy, that brings me hope for sure. And then there's kind of like the bigger sort of metaphysical, existential sources of hope, or what I really love. My advisor at PLTS is Dr. Cynthia Molovita, and one of the books that she's written, she talks about moral spiritual power, and sort of sources of moral spiritual power. And I think for me, the sort of like existential sources of hope come from these like larger convictions I have, it from my faith, from my belief in the goodness of creation, of God's creation, and I mean that inclusively and expansively beyond just humankind. I also think a lot about Austin Channing Brown's book. What's it? The title is called, it's I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a White World. I think that's the correct title, but if it's not, oh, I apologize. But in the last chapter of that book, Austin talks about sort of standing in the shadow of hope, and sort of like having to let hope die as a Black woman living in the US. The book was published like only a couple of years ago, very much still relevant today. And I think that it's important to remember as well that sense of like, sometimes we can't have hope, but that doesn't mean it's gone forever. Sometimes it feels impossible to be hopeful about something as someone who struggled with mental health and struggled with depression, amongst other things. Sometimes it feels like it's too much to ask of myself to hope, but I can at least ask of myself to believe that one day I can be hopeful, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes that's all we can do. That's all we can ask of each other, or give to each other in our grieving, in our hardships. And sometimes that's what's appropriate. Like, it's not always. I also think of oh goodness, it's the verse, but also a song. There's a season for everything. Yeah, there's a season for jubilee and celebration and hope that springs out of good times, and there's a season for hope that springs out of darkness and sort of not disbelief, but sort of grief.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yes, for everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. That's right. And it's the text, and the turn is the song.
There you go.
And I think it's actually in our hymnal, even though it was made popular as a pop song 40 years ago.
Yeah. Well, and everybody under the sun, not everybody, but many people have covered it. But I love the original.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to think of the original group that did it. We'll think of it. But anyway, well, good. I think that is right. I mean, that Every time is a season for hope. The good times are the easy seasons for hope. The tough times, though, are also the season for hope. That's very good. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today, Tori, on Hope Matters. I'm so pleased that you could be with us.
Thank you.
This has been Hope Matters, a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Santa Monica, California. Our guest today has been Tori Valcarcel, a student at Pacific Lutheran Theological Seminary in Berkeley, California, and preparing for ordination in our Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And we're so glad that you could be with us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week when we talk to somebody else interesting around the country and around the corner about the theme of hope. We believe that hope matters, and we believe we have a God of hope. Thank you.